The invitation arrived in an expensive cream-colored envelope, sealed with an intricate gold emblem. The elegant handwriting on the front read my name, Amelia Carter. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing what was inside. My ex-husband's sister Rebecca was getting married, and despite everything I had been invited. I knew this wasn't an act of kindness. It was a carefully planned move. Rebecca had never hidden her disdain for me, and after my marriage fell apart, she made sure I felt every bit of her contempt. As I unfolded the delicate invitation, my son, Oliver, peeked over my shoulder. "Mom, are we really going?" he asked, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity. I sighed. It would be rude not to. Deep down, I knew I didn't owe Rebecca anything, but I didn't want to teach Oliver to avoid difficult situations. Besides, attending would show that I wasn't ashamed of who I was. A single mother, a waitress, and someone who worked tirelessly to give her son a good life. The wedding venue was extravagant, a grand hall decorated with cascading flowers and golden chandeliers. Guests milled about in dazzling gowns and tailored suits, sipping on expensive champagne. It was the kind of event that oozed wealth and exclusivity. Oliver clutched my hand tightly as we walked in. He was only 10, but he was incredibly perceptive. "Mom, why do I feel like people are staring at us?" I forced a smile. "Because they have nothing better to do." We weaved through the tables, searching for our assigned seats. My stomach dropped when I found them. My chair, placed at the very edge of the hall, far from the main table, had a small, neatly written place card. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My fingers trembled as I picked up the card, reading it over and over as if my eyes were deceiving me. But there it was, a cruel joke disguised as elegant calligraphy. A few nearby guests exchanged glances, some whispering behind their hands. Others chuckled, entertained by my obvious humiliation. Oliver's grip on my hand tightened. "Mom, what does this mean?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, willing myself not to let the tears fall. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "It means your Aunt Rebecca thinks labels define people." Anger flickered in Oliver's eyes. "That's not fair." Before I could say anything else, he let go of my hand and marched toward the stage, where Rebecca and her new husband were about to give their toast. I barely had time to react before I saw my son grabbing the microphone, determination written all over his face. "Excuse me, everyone," he called out, his voice ringing through the hall. Gasps filled the room as heads turned toward my 10-year-old son. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what he was about to say, but something told me this night wasn't going to go the way Rebecca had planned. The room fell into complete silence. The clinking of glasses stopped, and every pair of eyes locked onto my son. He stood there, his small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the wedding stage, but his voice was steady, full of conviction. "Before this celebration continues, I need to say something," Oliver announced, gripping the microphone tightly. His gaze swept over the crowd before settling on Rebecca, who stood frozen, her smile now a tight-lipped expression of shock. I wanted to rush up there, to stop him before he said anything that would make things worse. But something in his posture, in his unwavering confidence, kept me rooted to my spot. "My mom is sitting at the very back of this hall. The name card on her seat doesn't have her name. It doesn't say, Amelia Carter. It says, single mother waitress. Like that's all she is. Like she's not worth being here." A murmur ran through the crowd, some guests exchanging awkward glances. Others looked genuinely surprised, as if they hadn't noticed the cruel joke Rebecca had orchestrated. "She's more than that," Oliver continued, his voice growing stronger. "My mom is the reason I wake up every morning with a full stomach, the reason I go to school with clean clothes. She works harder than anyone in this room, and she does it all without complaining. So if you think reducing her to a label makes you better than her, you're wrong." Rebecca's face turned red, but before she could speak, an older woman near the front row, someone I recognized as one of my ex-husband's aunts, stood up and clapped. Then another person joined in. And another. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. I felt tears sting my eyes, but they weren't from shame this time. They were from pride. Rebecca, flustered and furious, grabbed the microphone from Oliver. "All right, that's enough," she snapped. "This is my wedding, not a speech contest." Oliver crossed his arms. "Then maybe you shouldn't have tried to humiliate my mom at your wedding." More murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Rebecca's husband looked at her, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. I could tell that the power dynamic was shifting, and for once, Rebecca wasn't in control. At that moment, I knew one thing for sure. This night was no longer about her perfect wedding. It was about something much bigger. The moment Rebecca handed the microphone back to the wedding band, the tension in the air didn't fade. People were no longer whispering just about me, they were whispering about her. Rebecca's new husband, Daniel, frowned at her. "What is he talking about?" he asked, his voice low but clearly audible to those nearby. "Did you really do that?" Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. "It was just a joke," she muttered, glaring at me as though I was the one at fault. Daniel's jaw clenched. "A joke? You humiliated someone at our wedding for fun." Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, but the damage was already done. Some guests were shaking their heads in disappointment, while others looked outright disgusted. I stood up, feeling the weight of my emotions crash over me. I should have left. I should have walked out with Oliver. But before I could move, Rebecca's mother, my former mother-in-law, approached me. "I had no idea she did this," she said quietly, her voice laced with guilt. "Amelia, I'm so sorry." It was the first time she had ever apologized to me for anything. Oliver tugged on my hand, looking up at me. "Are we leaving, Mom?" I took a deep breath, glancing around the hall. The people who once sneered at me now looked at me with something different. Respect. "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "We're staying." And with that, I walked past Rebecca, head held high, and took my rightful place at the table as the wedding continued. The shift in energy was impossible to ignore. The very people who once followed Rebecca's lead in mocking me now distanced themselves from her. Even her closest friends seemed uneasy, whispering among themselves and casting wary glances her way. Daniel, her husband, hadn't said another word to her since Oliver's speech. The tension between them was obvious. When the first dance was announced, he hesitated before taking her hand, his movements stiff and forced. The guests murmured, sensing the growing rift. The moment the first dance was announced, I could see the hesitation in Daniel's stance. His grip on Rebecca's hand was loose, his expression stiff. He was still processing what had just happened. The guests had started to pick up on the tension, murmuring amongst themselves. The lights dimmed as soft music filled the air, and Rebecca forced a smile, trying to regain control of the situation. She led Daniel to the dance floor, swaying gracefully in her designer gown. But something was off. Daniel wasn't looking at her the way a groom should on his wedding night. Instead, his eyes kept flickering toward me and Oliver, then to the guests whispering about the cruel joke Rebecca had played. My former mother-in-law, Eleanor, sat beside me, her fingers tapping restlessly against the table. "I don't understand why she would do this," she murmured, shaking her head. I let out a soft sigh. "Because she wanted to humiliate me." Eleanor turned to look at me, guilt evident in her eyes. I always knew Rebecca was difficult, but this was beyond cruel. "I won't defend her." I didn't know what to say to that. She had never defended me before. Maybe for the first time she truly saw me for who I was. More than just the woman her son divorced, more than just a single mother struggling to make ends meet. As the dance continued, I noticed Daniel whisper something into Rebecca's ear. Her smile faltered for a moment before she quickly forced it back in place. Whatever he said, it hadn't been pleasant. When the song ended, a polite round of applause followed, but the usual warmth of a wedding was missing. Rebecca and Daniel walked back to their table, and as they passed me, she shot me a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. I ignored it. She had lost her power over me the moment Oliver had spoken. But I wasn't the only one she was losing control over. Dinner was served and people ate, but the air was thick with unease. I could hear snippets of conversation around me. "I can't believe she wrote that on the place card. That poor woman, how humiliating. What kind of bride does that on her wedding day?" Rebecca, clearly sensing the shift, tried to salvage the night. She stood up, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she said, her voice overly sweet. "I know weddings can be stressful and sometimes things don't go as planned, but in the end, all that matters is love and family." It was a poor attempt to sweep everything under the rug, but no one responded the way she expected. There were no enthusiastic cheers, no warm smiles. The energy remained cold. Daniel, who had barely spoken since their dance, finally turned to her. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Rebecca, was that card your idea?" Rebecca stiffened. "Daniel, this isn't the time. It's a simple question," he cut her off. "Did you write those words? Single mother waitress." Her eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but there wasn't one. I may have approved it, but it was just a joke." She let out a nervous laugh, as if she could still make the situation disappear. Daniel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "That wasn't a joke. That was cruel." The table fell into stunned silence. Rebecca's face turned pale, then red with embarrassment. "You're seriously upset about this? She's my ex-sister-in-law." "She's a person," Daniel shot back. "And if this is how you treat people who don't fit into your perfect world, then maybe I should be worried." A few gasps echoed around us. Rebecca's eyes widened in panic. "Daniel, please, let's not do this here." But he wasn't backing down. "Why not? You were fine humiliating her in front of everyone. Why shouldn't I hold you accountable in front of them?" Rebecca's hands clenched into fists. She turned to her mother. "Mom, are you seriously going to let him talk to me like this?" Eleanor sighed and took a slow sip of her wine before replying. "You brought this on yourself, Rebecca." The betrayal on Rebecca's face was evident. For the first time she had no allies. The rest of the reception dragged on awkwardly. The joyful atmosphere never returned, and Daniel kept his distance from Rebecca. By the time they cut the cake, he barely looked at her. The guests, once eager to celebrate, had lost their enthusiasm. I had planned to leave early, but as I watched the tension between the newlyweds, I knew something was about to break. Sure enough, not long after the cake cutting, I saw Daniel walking away from the reception hall. Rebecca hurried after him, her dress flowing behind her as she grabbed his arm. "What is your problem?" she hissed, her voice barely controlled. Daniel exhaled sharply. "My problem, Rebecca, is that I just married someone I don't recognize." She scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. This isn't drama," he said. "This is me realizing I made a mistake." My breath caught. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Rebecca's expression crumbled for a moment before she put on her usual mask of arrogance. "You're not leaving me. We just got married." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Then give me one good reason to stay." Rebecca blinked, taken aback. Because I love you." Daniel shook his head. "You love control. You love appearances. But love. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this tonight." For the first time, Rebecca looked truly afraid. "Daniel, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "I need to think," he said, stepping away. "I don't know if I can do this, Rebecca." He walked off, leaving her standing there, alone. Rebecca didn't return to the reception after that. She disappeared somewhere, probably trying to regain her composure. But the damage was done. I stayed a little longer, mostly for Oliver's sake, who had been chatting with some of the other kids. When it was finally time to leave, Eleanor stopped me by the exit. "I was wrong about you," she admitted. I raised an eyebrow. "You were." She nodded. "For years, I let Rebecca's opinions shape how I saw you. But after tonight, I see things more clearly. She hesitated, then added, I hope you won't hold it against me. Thought about it. About all the years I had been dismissed, belittled and judged. And then I looked at Oliver, who had never once questioned my worth. No, I said finally. I won't. Eleanor smiled, a real, genuine smile. Take care of yourself, Amelia. As Oliver and I walked out of the venue, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had been seen as the woman who wasn't good enough, the single mother, the waitress. But tonight that label had shattered. And for the first time in a long time I felt free. The morning light filtered through my curtains, but I had been awake for hours. The wedding was over, but its aftermath was just beginning. I scrolled through my phone, my inbox flooded with messages. Some were from friends, offering words of support. Others were from people I barely knew, wanting to gossip about the disaster that had unfolded. Oliver walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Mom, it's all over the internet. I looked up. What is? He placed his tablet on the table, and I felt my stomach drop. Clips from last night's wedding were everywhere. There was a video of Oliver's speech, Rebecca's embarrassment, and even Daniel's reaction. The comments were brutal. That kid is a hero. Bridezilla got what she deserved. Imagine humiliating someone at your wedding and thinking no one would call you out. I set the tablet down, exhaling slowly. This is a mess. Oliver shrugged. Maybe for her. I should have expected what came next. Not even an hour later my phone rang. Rebecca. I answered cautiously. Hello. You ruined my wedding, she shrieked. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Rebecca, you did that yourself. She let out a harsh laugh. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? My wedding is a joke now. People are calling me names, and Daniel. Her voice broke slightly. He left this morning. He said he needed space. I wasn't surprised. What do you want me to do about it? Yes. Fix this, she demanded. I let out a bitter chuckle. You think I control the internet? Rebecca, you tried to humiliate me. Backfired. That's not my problem. She was quiet for a moment before she spat. You're still a single mother waitress. That's all you'll ever be. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. And you're still a cruel, insecure woman who has to put others down to feel better about herself. The difference is, I don't need to prove my worth to anyone. I know who I am. Silence. Then she hung up. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. I had spent years letting her words cut me. But today, they didn't hurt at all. Later that afternoon my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was shocked to see Daniel standing there. Can we talk? He asked. I hesitated before stepping aside. Oliver peeked out from his room. Hey, you're the groom. Daniel managed a weak smile. Yeah, sort of. We sat in the living room, the weight of unspoken words between us. I owe you an apology, he finally said. For what? For not seeing who Rebecca really was sooner. He sighed, rubbing his face. I should have realized how she treated you. I ignored the signs. I studied him. What happens now? He shook his head. I don't know. I left this morning. Told her I needed space. But honestly, I don't think I want to go back. I wasn't surprised. She said some awful things to you, didn't she? He asked quietly. For years. He let out a humorless laugh. And I was blind to it. He stared at his hands. I thought I was marrying someone kind. Now I'm not so sure. I hesitated. Do you love her? He was silent for a long time. Finally he whispered. I don't know. That said everything. He left soon after, lost in thought. As I tucked Oliver into bed that night, he looked up at me. Mom, are you happy? Thought about it. About how, for the first time in years, I wasn't the one feeling humiliated. Smiled. Yeah, buddy. I think I am. Oliver grinned and snuggled under his blanket. As I turned off the light, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I was free. The days after the wedding felt like a whirlwind. The video of Oliver's speech continued to spread, and before I knew it, my inbox was flooded with messages. Some from strangers offering support, others from old acquaintances who suddenly wanted to reconnect. It was overwhelming, but in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my boss at the diner. "Amelia, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. Had the attention from the wedding caused problems at work? I met her in the small office at the back of the diner, bracing myself for bad news. Instead, she smiled. "I saw the video," she said. "And I saw how you handled yourself with grace. That's exactly the kind of strength and leadership we need here." I frowned. "What are you saying?" She leaned forward. "I want to offer you a promotion. Manager position." I blinked. "Manager? It comes with a raise and better hours," she added. "You've been with us for years, Amelia. You've always put in the work. This just pushed me to realize you deserve more." A warmth spread through my chest. I had spent so long thinking people only saw me as a struggling single mother. But now, someone saw my worth. "I'd love that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He grinned. "Good. You start Monday." When I got home, Oliver was sitting on the couch, his tablet in his lap. "Mom, you're famous," he said, showing me another news article about the wedding disaster. I sighed, sitting next to him. "I don't want to be famous, honey. I just want to live my life." He tilted his head. "Are you happy?" Smiled. "I got a promotion today." His face lit up. "Really? That's awesome. It means more time with you. Better pay. No more late-night shifts." Oliver hugged me tightly. "Mom, you deserve this." I held him close, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. Just when I thought life was settling down, I got another surprise. One afternoon, as I was leaving the diner, I ran into Daniel. "Hey," he said, looking sheepish. I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you here." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, I guess I needed to see a familiar face." I studied him. He looked different, tired but lighter. "You okay?" "Yes." He sighed. "I left Rebecca." And blinked. "What?" "She wasn't the person I thought she was," he admitted. I realized I was trying too hard to make something work that was never right to begin with. I wasn't sure what to say. "I just wanted to thank you," he continued. "Because if that wedding hadn't gone the way it did, I might still be pretending everything was fine." I nodded slowly. "So what now?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Figure out who I am without her." He hesitated. "Maybe start over." There was something in the way he looked at me that made my heart race just a little. "Good luck," I said softly. He smiled. "You too." As he walked away, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by my past. I was Amelia Carter, a mother, fighter, someone who deserved happiness. And for the first time I truly believed it. A week passed since the wedding, and the dust had finally begun to settle. The viral videos slowed down, the messages in my inbox became fewer, and life started to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. At the diner, I had stepped into my new role as manager. It felt surreal at first, giving instructions instead of taking them, handling schedules instead of struggling to find shifts. But as the days passed, I realized I was good at this. For years, I had managed my life, balancing work, motherhood, and survival. Running a restaurant. It was nothing compared to that. One afternoon, as I counted receipts in the back office, a familiar voice interrupted my focus. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I'd like to order the best milkshake in town." I looked up, a smile spreading across my face as I saw Oliver standing in the doorway. "You come here every day," I teased. "Shouldn't you be sick of my milkshakes by now?" He grinned. "Never." I set down my work and walked out with him, making us both milkshakes behind the counter. As we sat at one of the booths, Oliver sipped his drink thoughtfully. "You know, Mom, I think that wedding was a good thing." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? How do you figure?" "Well," he said, counting on his fingers, "Rebecca got what she deserved, you got a promotion, and people finally saw how amazing you are. chuckled. I didn't need people to see that. I just needed to believe it myself. He nodded seriously, then glanced out the window. I followed his gaze, and my heart skipped a beat. Daniel was standing outside, hands in his pockets, looking hesitant. Are you going to let him in? Oliver asked, watching me carefully. I took a deep breath. I don't know. Do you want to? That was the real question, wasn't it? The truth was, Daniel had been nothing but kind to me since the wedding. He had been honest about his mistakes, about not seeing Rebecca for who she truly was. He had left her not because of me, but because he realized he deserved better. Just like I had. I exhaled, glancing at Oliver. I think I'll hear what he has to say. Oliver grinned. Good. Because I kind of like him. I shook my head, laughing, before standing up and heading to the door. Daniel looked up as I stepped outside. Hey, he said, his voice cautious. Hey. We stood there for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. I don't know what I'm doing here, he admitted. But I wanted to see you. I tilted my head. To see me. Or to figure out what comes next. He smiled, running a hand through his hair. Maybe both. I studied him, searching for hesitation, for any sign that he was uncertain. But all I saw was sincerity. For so long I had let my past define me. I had believed the world saw me as just a struggling single mother. But Oliver had shown me that I was more. Maybe it was time to see what else life had in store. I crossed my arms, smirking slightly. You hungry? Daniel looked surprised, then chuckled. Starving. Good, I said, holding the door open for him. Because I know the manager. As he stepped inside, Oliver grinned at me from our booth, giving me a small thumbs up. I rolled my eyes playfully but couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time in a long time, the future felt like mine to decide.